Hello, hello. Okay, so last stream started with an disabled audio. We don't have that today, and I hope the microphone volume is alright. And for everyone who watched the last stream or tried to watch it on YouTube, there seems to be an issue with copyright, but the issue is only because YouTube and Twitch can differentiate between a classical piece played by one person and played by another person, and if one recording is public domain and someone else has a also a recorded version of it, they don't make a difference between that. So that's why we are now back to the Twitch free music library, which is playing in the background. And I will quickly go over some things that we did last time. So we will take that as a new start on this stream. I am developing Infectious Void on the stream. I want this to be like a dev diary. So yesterday, or not yesterday, 2 days ago actually, I wanted to stream yesterday, but I couldn't make it. We worked on these flies, which I wanted to fix. These are, I think it's best to show them, because you can't make much of the magenta bubbles. So if you look at these flies down here, you can see that they are actually individual small flies flying around, and they are using a path generated by a tool called LeanTween, which is available on the asset store. And the funny thing about LeanTween is that it doesn't come with a path editor. It says that you can animate along paths, but it doesn't include an animator, an editor for it. It does include some basic examples of making paths, and for that the developer is using individual points. And like if you look at this path here, you can barely see that they are marked, but all these individual points, he included a version with like 3 points, and then the object was animating like that on a curve, and that's all there is about animating on a path for LeanTween, for the free version. And then you can actually buy an editor for it, and then you are able to set individual points and move the handles around to make it a real path. And I didn't want to buy the editor just for that. I wanted to use the feature, and thus I have tweaked the script that came with it a bit, and this totally is fine for all my use cases. I have a set of points which I'm setting. So what he did was he predefined like his 3 points. He predefined them in the script, and then he took the values from that. And I wanted it to have an endless amount of points which I can follow. So the way I am doing this would be like duplicating the last one and moving it there, duplicating the last one, moving it there, duplicating it, moving it to the top, and then so you can make a path from these bubbles, and then the fly would fly along them. And the cool thing is about my changed version of the script, it just takes this path object and calculates or gets the children of the parent and calculates the path from that. I can quickly show it. So this is the script. You have the move along path script, and you can get transforms from a parent. You can deactivate the transforms afterwards because we don't want to see these bubbles afterwards. We can reverse the path. We can tell it which path it is, and it will populate a list of transforms. And it can also randomize the path. I wanted to have that feature for the flies, and it can randomize it by a specific amount. And it uses an object which will be animated along the path, and a speed and a randomness and speed, and also an animation type. And the cool thing about the animation type, this is included in Lean Tween. This actually gives you control over how fluid the animation is, and if it is repeated. So there's a difference between strictly flying from one point to another and forming like a triangle, or flying smoothly around the edges and forming like a circle or an oval. And for this I'm using ease in out circle for the flies. And I think when this stream is finished and I'm sharing it to YouTube, I will probably attach or upload this script somewhere. So if someone is interested in using this, I will make it available. I thought about maybe making a YouTube video out of it, but I'm not sure yet. So it starts with the start void, and basically it just uses parent transform, get components and children transform, and then it creates an array which is one bigger than the length of the transforms we got, and then it puts these transforms. So this is for reversing the path. It puts these transforms into another array and deactivates them. This array is randomized afterwards, and then what is Lean Tween here is actually just this small part of it. It's a visualized path, which is an LT spline, and you can give it a new LT spline with the array of vectors, and then you can create the tween. And I told it to move spline along the path that we created. We have to give it the vectors again. But I don't know, to animate. Okay, we give it the game object, and then we give it the path, and then we're giving it some additional options. I think the visualize path is only for the gizmos. This was also included in the default examples of Lean Tween. So that this is the part that draws these cool lines in the game view, like we've seen. And this is what I did last time. I'm using this Lean Tween script to animate these flies. And because they are individual flies, and I attached an interactable object script to them, which makes it possible for me to trigger events on an object also within hitbox. So if I'm hitting, like in this case, I spawn a hitbox in front of me, and then I can kill individual flies from this hive. And if I walk through it, they are also eating my skin off, which is what we did 2 days ago. And I'm dead. So this is where we left off. And I wanted to show this really quick, and will now do some coding, because I want to get something out of the way, which is I had a lot of these interactable objects like save points, teleport potions, health potions, a shadow that is, I can activate it. I have these switches standing around, which you could trigger to open a door, and the enemies. And this is like the shadow. So this shadow, if you were walking through it, you would get additional sickness, and too much sickness will kill you. And I had all these different mechanics in the Ludum Dare versions of the game, but I rewrote the script behind them. And before I start building a new level and using the new script and rebuilding everything, I want to make sure that the things, if I already have one save mechanic, if I take the sword, you can see that the screen shakes, there's an animation. The sword actually doesn't appear in the new version. And if I then walk through it and get eaten or hit by an enemy, the screen pops up that tells me that I died, and when I press space, I get set to the beginning again. I am human again, I can pick up the sword again, and all these flies are there again, and the enemy, if I killed him, would also reappear. The thing about that is it doesn't work if I actually reload the whole scene, and it only works by restoring everything. So it basically tells every interactable object. Every interactable object is, I will show this really quick. If I take the sword and it's an interactable object, it has it's a bigger script. It has basically a list of actions, and every action has settings and targets, and it has some basic settings for the interactable object to get triggered. So if I have a minimum illness, or if it also tells me the interaction distance, because it also cares about blending in this additional hint, which is here, the take sword, and which button to press. I will tell it which texts to use for that, and then blend it in if I'm in the interaction distance. I can also tell it to ignore it, and I can tell it to get triggered by a hitbox or by distance. And for the hitbox, I have implemented a hitbox calculator to it, which gives me the opportunity to let it spawn its own hitboxes on objects. The thing is about reversing all these effects that happened is every action has a restoration method. I could tell it to not restore anything, and it also has a run method if it's repeating or once. And I don't have anything implemented now for the restoration method except reverse. And what it does is, if this is triggered, it uses the settings in here and the targets in here to do specific things like emit particles on a particle system, or deactivate the renderer or something, play a sound, or deactivate a game object, activate an animator, or activate a collider. It also can, there's like this appearance system, and it can change the appearance of an entity, like the player who is starting as a human can change his appearance to this black hero. And with that, I can do some interesting things. And if it gets reversed, it basically just undoes all these things. And this worked really fine for the Ludum Dare version. The camera sometimes doesn't like it sometimes turns me dark. I'm sorry for that. It's a really shitty webcam from Logitech. If I kill all these, it worked really fine restoring them, because it just, if I kill these, it deactivates the renderer and the collider and some other things. And also with them, if they get reversed, they also change back to their original position. So it's fine, but it can't remember a specific state. I want the game to be able, if there's an exit, like here, if the map just ends here and I exit it, and I come back later, I wanted to restore a saved state, and it also is, it's very basic to just reverse everything that happened, and I don't trust it to be stable enough. So I want at least some things to be stored permanently. And like you have in Castlevania or other Super Metroid like games, you have, it's not everything that gets restored. You have enemies that just reappear. If you have a floor of zombies at the beginning, the zombies will always be there. But if there was an item on the floor, or if there was a switch to press, then it gets remembered. And I think I will save these things in a new script, which will be a restorable object. And I won't create it with that. I will go into Visual Studio Code. And I want this to be, I will put it in interaction because restoration method is already in there. Create a new file. It's using the Unity engine, and it's a public class restorable object. And Unity should take that. I'm not so happy with the playlist playing in the background. I'm only using this because I was using piano music before, which was public domain, and Twitch doesn't, and YouTube don't care if it's public domain. If it's played by someone else who holds a copyright about for his recording of the piece, then it gets flagged, and I really don't want to appeal these flags every time I stream. Okay, we want to have some basic variables for the object, so it will be some things that we want to save. We want, for example, to save a bool, which will be something like permanently disabled. Or we want to save a vector-free for a position. And maybe we would just start with that. If I have an interactable object and I want it to remember things, I can add it to the triggered action, which is the container for the settings and the targets. And it has all these things like particle system, game object, interactable object. And we will add a header for restoration, and we will give it a public restorable object right to restorable. It might be that I will change the naming of the variables later. And we want to give it something on the way, and I will add this to settings. And I will need to add... I could just give it a complete restorable object and set variables in there, but it won't be... I can make it in there. I can... add some settings. And I want to create a new file. So what I want to do is write a basic wrapper around storing the current position or storing the current value of something in the restorable object. And I want to have something. I want to have an enum for that. And I will name it so I can tell it to maybe use the position from the object himself or another object. And maybe we will use something like an apply function to do something like if get position from okay. We need to create an instance of settings first. And let's move this to uppercase. Okay, so we have these settings and we have the apply function, which should use settings, get position from equals get position from current. We could do something like that. And we also need it will be a bit complicated, but it's what I am currently have in my mind, and I will just program it like that and see if it works. So what I wanted to have is like the settings. And it has a maybe something like that. Okay, that would override that. And then we could use that stored position, storable settings, origin, transform, position, something like that. Maybe I will rename. So if I have the interactable object, this music really grinds my gears. But I don't know what else to choose. The only other thing that I can use from the Twitch library that doesn't sound like a complete mess is the rap playlist. Wow. Interesting. There's like no calm and relaxed piano music in this. Maybe I would just turn it off for now and turn it on back later. Okay, an attribute is missing. Okay, good. So I'm not sure what he wants to tell me. Interaction. Maybe he wants to tell me that I need to reopen Visual Studio Code. Sometimes it gets stuck. Yeah, basically it wanted me to do that. And now I have the triggered action. And okay, so this is the thing Unity was complaining about. And we can now add a restorable settings. So we have a right to restorable and an array of restorable settings. And let's check if this is displayed correctly in the editor. And we now have components, effects, entities, and we have activation sounds. It doesn't get shown. So for the camera shake preset, okay, this was only an enum. It might be that we need to add a system serializable. And wait if it appears here. And it doesn't. For the interactable object himself, we had a triggered action, and the triggered action is also serializable. And at the point where we include it, we can just use an array of that. So it should be fine. And there it is. So there may be something with Unity and not re-importing the scripts. But it also might be that there was a class in here that isn't serializable, but usually Unity will just give us, it will look like these headers and will not be changeable. So if we look into that, we can have the restorable settings, the calling object. I mean, yeah, we can manipulate that, but this should also be something to select. And we have target objects, and we have the restorable. No. Okay. So it's not exactly the order I wanted that to call in. I have, of course, we want to have the restorable object, but let's see if I can remove that. Because we don't want the target setting to be a list of restorable object blobs. We want it to be a list of targets. So this gets removed. So we will instead I want it to be like a list of game objects carrying the script, which will most likely be the parent of the object, but I want it to be manipulatable. So because that doesn't work, we will use a list of game objects instead and get the component from the targets. And for example, we want the restorable object to be our restorable that gets written to, and we want the restorable settings to be whatever we are writing to it. And we want the restorable settings to have that. Okay, so we didn't need to have this here. You will get it from the object that we give our target to work with. Okay, so we can have it named current, but wrong one. The naming convention would or the use would most likely be get position from myself. And yeah, it complains because we want it to be myself. And if settings get position from other, targets, objects. So maybe this is also a bit too much for now, because I also don't really want to use it right now. Target object, transform position. Settings, restorable settings. Target object. I'm not sure. The whole thing may be just a bit too bloated for what I am trying to do. So I'm working myself towards this. Sometimes I write things and then I'll simplify them afterwards, because we really don't need the get position from. We just need a transform get position from. But then we cannot use a predefined. Of course, we can just leave it null if it doesn't have one. So we will use settings get position from if settings get position from is not null. Get the position from that, or we get it. We give it a vector 3, which will be a custom position. And this has an issue that we need to tell him, in addition to that, to maybe not store a position at all. Because sometimes we want this to be true by default, but we want it to be disabled if settings use did he name it stored position? No, we named it store position. Then we wanted to have all this, which is a bit simpler for the things that I want to do with that. I just basically want it to be able to remember its position, or override the position with something else, or with the position from a different object or a custom one. And waiting. Well, very interesting. We will re-import these scripts. And now it has the new version. Well, Unity is a bit moody today. So we have the restore position, and we have the get position from, and we have a custom position. And we can also give that a header. And we can add something like activation state. And if we have that, we can just set permanently disabled to settings disabled permanently. But this again, there's often the issue that you want to write something like that, but you don't want it to override it all the time. And an easy method would be to use another bool activation store activation state and tell it to be true, which is okay, but it's not the most beautiful thing to do. And maybe we want this to be positive instead. We have a bool called active, and this will be true by default. And we want this to be called active too. So now we can I don't know what it is with Visual Studio Code today and Unity. Because we clearly changed the naming of the variable. And now we should be able, we have this restorable object which will carry our script, but it can't. Because it's not a mono behavior. Okay, I think this will give us the opportunity to tell triggered action. Okay, so it's this. I think if it decides if it can be attached to an object based on being a mono behavior, it gives us the opportunity to get the script from a different object by dragging in a game object. So now we can just tell it to use this one, and things are fine. Then we don't need to get go the additional route of getting the component from an existing game object. And now we can at least, we have these restorable settings. We are storing the position. We are using the position from ourselves, and we are storing an activation state, and we want the state to be turned off. And we have active and a stored position. We really don't need to store the position for the sort. So, of course, it didn't do anything because we didn't implement it. We have this function in triggered action called run, and it cares about running all these different things that we wanted to do. And I will move it to something like here. And we want it to have to go through targets, restorable, right to restorable. And we want it to apply restorable settings from the same number identifier in the list, and we want to write it down. And we don't need to add it because we also have the reverse function, but this is nothing that we want to restore when we are reversing the object. And now we can store the active state and the stored position in this second container. And I will the goal is to tell the restorable object if it should activate this object inside it, and if it should move it to a specific position. And later on we can use these settings from the restorable object and write them to a save game, and this will maybe solve our issues with permanently disabled or active objects. So if we now have a void initialize, or in general we can just use start, and if it is active, so we want this to be in a second function, and if it is active, we want its target to We want the target to be either active or not. And we want the target to have our stored position. We are setting this to be false by default. The fingers with vectors, they can't be null. They will only be vector free 0. But in the occasion that we want to place something at vector free 0, we can just probe for that. We need to tell it whenever we actually write a position that we want to use the stored position. And then, before I write that, we have to put it into a condition. What I'm missing here is what I wrote at the beginning. Maybe. Okay, now it becomes tricky. I want these settings not to be loose variables. I want these settings to be inside a container. And then I can, when I'm writing a save game, I can write all these containers to a list and store the list of containers instead of having to map all these individual settings. Now, what I think about this is whether I want to use the existing restorable settings, but I wrote it more in a way that works for the interactable objects. So we will just name it settings, because later on we can do something like restorable object settings, restorable object settings. So we can use this for the save game instead, and it should work as well. So for that, we are now placing these things inside of the settings, activation state, and we want to call this a position state. And now we need to fix these errors with a public class, not class, public settings. And because we named it wrong, we need to give it an uppercase letter. And then we can just use this. And it won't speak to us. Maybe Visual Studio Code wants to get a restart again. Very interesting. Yeah, it does not contain a definition for stored position. So we have a public class settings. And we will tell it to be serializable. Oh, of course. Of course. That's why we named it restorable settings at the start. And I basically just named it settings after we removed the initial implementation. So now it looks more clean and should work a bit better. And if our target isn't active, I would tell it to be... So in the new system, I would tell the interactable object to be not active and give the restorable object something to care about. And it has an initial set of settings, and it will always apply itself to the object. So if it doesn't get overwritten by the save game, which will be in here, which will be something like manager's game instance, get save game info, something like that, and get save game restoration info. It will overwrite these initial settings, these default settings that we set here, with something that it gets from the save game. So if we tell it to not be active at all, and we also don't use the stored position, it shouldn't even appear. But there's a different sword on the ground which appears, but we can walk past it, we can't collect it. So the original object, okay, that's these. So the object doesn't exist for the player, which is cool when I want to reinitialize levels after they get saved or left, after the player leaves them. So this can be a good basis for that. I will take a quick break and be back in 5 minutes and turn on the wonderful Twitch FM music again for that. So see you in 5 minutes, and thank you for watching. It's nice to have someone here. Okay, I'll be back in some seconds. Okay, so let's continue. I've got myself something to drink and got some fresh air. And I'm sorry, I okay, sorry. This was the door. Um, Mainly because there's a big storm today coming through Germany, and yeah, someone wanted to give me a warning so that we move everything from the balcony. I think I will do that, but maybe in half an hour. I wanted to come back, and we left off with our restorable object, and next on my list, now that I have restorable objects and I can actually tell my interactable object to write permanent data into its own restorable object state. What we can also do, instead of just storing an actual position, but maybe this is too much. We could store an offset instead of a position. or in addition to a position. So if you want to move an object just slightly to the left or to the right, we could do that, but I can always implement that, so there's no hurry. I want to have a very basic save game API, because I know that saving games will be a big chunk of work later on, and I want to get that done before I start, or get that done, get an API done, so that I only make calls to an imaginary save game system, and then later on I can attach whatever save game system I have for the current platform that I use to the API. And we have this managers game, which still contains stuff that it shouldn't. So this is also quite a big chunk. Things that I implemented during the Ludum Dare, and that has to be removed or put into a proper place afterwards. Updates allowed. Bool allowed, true. Return allowed. Okay. Well, player interaction allowed. So this is okay. I already implemented something like an execution type, movement, action, effects, physics, and they are inside of an execution set. And I'm not sure where I'm already using that. But I implemented that to some of the I would like to know where I actually used that. So it's inside of manager's execution. Execution allowed. Execution type. So we already have a manager for that. Which we would ask instead of updates allowed, which is part of interactable object. And this would be, well, interactable object. The calculation, if the interactable object can actually be used, would be maybe in effects. In calculation, or we could just add interaction, and then we can tell our interactable object to instead ask for updates allowed. If not, manages execution. Okay. Execution allowed. So there's one. And it wants one execution type. I will probably have to implement something that contains multiple execution types, but for now I can just give it like execution type interaction. And if this isn't allowed, they don't get used. This is also a precaution for things that might happen later on during development, where I want to implement something like a pause system, and then it's easier if I can just tell my let me move the microphone a bit. If I can just tell the current execution to be the default execution set or the paused execution set, and there are available execution sets, and we have default, and it tells me to make use of all of these, and then we could have paused, and it only allows me to store data, read data, and calculate things, and maybe not even calculate things. So if we have, maybe we want something like input instead of calculations. And this would be more sane to use. So and with that, there is no reference to this function anymore, and I can delete it from manager's game, where I actually don't want that to be. But in general, instead of, I will do this maybe off screen or another time, I will just create a new singleton, which will be manager save games. And it will be somewhat of a copy of this. System collections generic, because I want to be able to make use of lists. It will be called managers save games, and it will be a managers save games instance, and then we can reuse that as a singleton. And we will give it, we will do that later. It will need a new folder for save games, and in save games we want something like save game, and this will be using the Unity engine, public class save game, and it will contain a list of, it will contain a string for current level, it will contain a string for the date, writing date, it will contain a list of restorable object settings, and this, I can't use this. The type or namespace list, okay. So we will add system collections generic. And restorable object wasn't found, which is interesting. It even offers to autocomplete it. I think I will restart Unity and VS Code together, because usually I don't have these types of issues. Okay. Let me do something really quick. Okay. Good, now we have our manager's save games and we will check if... Yep. So now VS Code recognizes restorable object again as an existing class. And we will see if we... because in the end our save game public class void write, our save game will be written either to a file or to an external system. So if you're developing for a console, it might be that you have to use a special API for that. So let's have the save game. Yeah, it's fine. And the save game contains current level, writing date, and a list of restorable objects. It will contain more in the future, but in general, I want this to be available in some way. So let's say we have a list of save game. Let's use a list. Visual Studio Code can be annoying. Of save game. And we want to be able to write save games. And for each save game, we want to write it. So, to make this easier, in a different game, in Fumiko, I stored like a player position, and there were different ways of restoring the player in a single level. And this time I want to make use of a system they also used in Castlevania, and that is these save game shrines. And a shrine will always be a single level, and that way if you save your game in a specific level, you will always get set to a default position. So we don't need to remember like the actual player position, we just need to initialize him at this specific level. But maybe we still want to make use of that, because we don't want the player to spawn at the door, but we want him to start directly on the shrine. So we want to save a public vector2 player position. And it just occurred to me that we should store vector 2s instead of vector 3s for our restorables. No, I don't want it to work like that again. We will need to implement autosaves and special saves. We won't load a save game right now, so I just put something in there because we need to. What we need to have is a cache of save games and a cache of autosaves, and it should be possible to load the list of save games and autosaves either from files or from the API at the beginning when the game boots up, and then use this cached list to write save games and make checks against them, like check if what the latest save game is, for example, without having to read from the file again. And same counts for the autosaves and the settings and things like that. And for these save games, maybe I want to rename it to something like manages persistent data, and the save games persistent data. Save games will be persistent data, and then we have not a list but persistent data for the settings. But no, that's too much. We want it to be a save game, and then we can have an additional we can't name it settings, or can we? We can name it settings. and name this persistent save game. Oh, that's why. Okay. Now we have this issue again. I would like Visual Studio Code to have like an option to reload. So we have persistent settings. And this will keep data like public, class, sound settings, or input settings, or like just basic graphics settings. Okay, this. Or we want game settings. This could be something like that. Or this could be volume music, or ambient, or FX. And this would need a specific enum for graphics settings. Something like low, medium, high, very high. Okay. And this will have something like a graphic setting graphics. Something like that, and this could have something like I don't know. Could be something like that, but that's not something I'm going to implement. Okay. And now we can use a persistent settings here and store that instead. So and we can tell it to write a new save game or write a new autosave. And we also can tell him to write existing save game and give it an index. So it would make a difference if I either write a one blob which contains the settings and the save games, or if I'm going to write single files for single save games. I will pause the stream for a short second and care about the balcony. Okay, I needed to move some objects from the balcony really quick because the storm that is coming already began getting louder and louder and throwing himself against the walls. And I think I won't be able to stream for that much anyways today because the storm will likely break the internet connection. So, the load save games, I don't need that inside of it. The thing is, it is practical to... So, what I was thinking about was splitting the save games into different files, which I won't do. I will save all the save games into a single file. Probably. Or I will use multiple files inside a folder. But it doesn't matter if you're working with a console, you can't just write files to the hard drive. Something like that. I'm not sure if data path is the game directory. It might also be that save game dir. Can be something like that. Okay, that's it for now. This is something that just takes a while and is in general just coding stuff down to use it later. I will continue on that next time. And if you are watching this as a VOD, thank you for watching. If you came by during the stream, thank you for that. Always happy to have people with me. And in general, I would say see you next time and have a nice day. Bye.